All right, good afternoon. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I hope all is well with everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Finance and Appropriations Committee meeting. Today is April 14th. It is a wonderful, warm, and lovely Wednesday afternoon. We're excited to have you all on deck. We have a fairly long meeting today. We'll be getting a presentation and covering, of course, our normal items for committee recommendation and consideration and deliberation. So provided that, what we can do is have a call to order right now. Mr. Treasurer.
Board Member Brown.
Here.
Board Member Cole.
Here.
Mr. Green.
Here.
Ms. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Jordan.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Welcome. And Board Member Ragland.
Here.
Everyone is in attendance. You have a full meeting and a quorum.
Awesome. Approval of our March 10th, 2021 meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second.
Board Member Cole.
Yes.
Mr. Green.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Jordan.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Board Member Ragland.
Yes.
And Board Member Brown.
Yes.
That motion carried.
All right, awesome. We can move right along to our monthly finance report. Mr. Treasurer.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair Cole. This is the monthly financial report for March. After your review, it will be presented to the Board of Education for discussion on April 20th, next Tuesday. Year-to-date revenue variance dropped this month down to $27.5 million, or 3.2% above plan. Last month, it was around $36 million above plan, or 5% above plan. Year-to-date expenditure variances increased to $65 million, or 8.9%. That's favorable, and it's below plan. Last month, it was about $61 million under plan, about 9.4% under plan. The cash balance dropped to 93 above plan from 97 above plan, and it stands at almost $504 million at the end of March. Just graphically, what's going on with the cash balance, you can see it pretty much is following last year's pattern, but obviously running ahead of where we had planned originally. Highlights for revenue for March: property taxes year to date are up 6.4 million. They came in about 4.2 million under plan this month. This was the month of settlement. We got the settlement on first half property taxes. That didn't come in quite as we had anticipated. You might recall from our discussion previously that after the second half tax collection last calendar year, which occurred in September, we were about 5.9 million above plan. So at this point, through the second settlement period or second tax collection period in this fiscal year, we picked up about another 500,000 above plan. I anticipate we'll likely end the year there. State aid this month continues to reflect the partial restoration of the cut in funding that occurred first in FY20 and then carried forward to FY21. So we were month to date about 653,000 over plan. Of that 22.4 million, remember that embedded in there is about a 19.5 million Bureau of Workers' Comp dividend, and therefore it accounts for a large portion of that variance. Property tax allocation, almost 4 million under plan year to date, 3.5 million year to date for the month. That's because it's going to come next month. It was just a timing issue. Property tax allocation is the rollback and homestead exemption that comes to us through the state of Ohio, and it arrives about a month after settlement, typically. Just graphically, how our revenues look, you can see we're very close to plan. Probably the largest variance is there in state aid. I share with you the monthly cash flow on state aid, just because we've had two kind of interesting bumps in state aid. Back in December, you can see the Bureau of Workers' Comp dividend payment come in, and then in February, that catch-up payment when they restored or partially restored the cut. If I take that $19.5 million dividend out, it smooths it out a little bit, but you can still see that catch-up payment is pretty apparent in February. Oh, let me back up just for a moment. One other thing, if you can see this, it's hard because of the scale of this graph, but right here, the March amount, you can see that the black dot there is just above the two graphs of plan, either the original plan that we have or the equal monthly payment plan. And that's indicative of the restoration of the partial restoration of the cut, which increased our monthly amount a bit. So we anticipate that it should be above plan there for the balance of the year. On a year-to-date variance, with that Bureau Workers' Comp dividend payment in there, those variances are 22 million and 26 million there, 22 million above the current plan and 26 million above the equal monthly flow plan. And in addition to the 19.5 Bureau Workers' Comp dividend, we also, relative to the plan, have received 2 million in casino revenue. You might recall, I took the casino revenue, it was about 2.5 million in the forecast, and then it would have been in the plan, but I took it out to reflect the potential for a downturn in their revenues, and hence not being able to make a payment to school districts as a result of the pandemic. As it turns out, we have received 2 million in casino revenue thus far this year. So that accounts for, we got 22 million off of the original plan, so 19 in the dividend and 2 in the casino revenue accounts for just about all of that 22 million variance. If we take the dividend out, you can see that had that not occurred, we would have been 6.8 million above the equal monthly plan and just 2.8 above the current plan. And again, 2 million of that 2.8 is casino revenue. So we would have been spot on. Breakdown of all other revenues. The restricted federal grant is the reimbursement from the federal government on the interest related to the QSCUBI debt, the qualified school construction bonds. As I told you, we received 1 in FY20. We were expecting 3 in FY22. I'm sorry, in FY21. We did get 1 prior to this. And then this past month, what was interesting was the next payment, they split into 2 payments. So we've got 106,000 this month, which is reflected in this graph, and then 139,000 in April, we know is coming in. And yet we'll still expect another, $240,000 payment this year to get us up to date with 2 payments per year, two reimbursements per year. Other revenue, the other revenue graph, it dropped to about 4 million above plan. Pilots continue to run above plan, but investment income is down about 2.6 million to plan. And other financing sources, and that's increased to about 1.5 million above plan this month. Because revenues for the month were 8.3 million under plan, you can see here reflected in the heat map a lot of moderately to unfavorable indicators. And yet on the year-to-date side, we're still in the very favorable category in terms of the heat map. And on the property allocation line, property tax allocation line 1.050, you'll see that it's moderately unfavorable in dollar amount, very unfavorable in terms of percentage because of that timing right here, because of that timing where we're going to receive that payment next month. Highlights on the expenditure side, personnel, under plan about 1.3 million for the month, 700,000 in salaries and wages, to 600,000 in benefits. You can see here overall we're running about 28 million under plan year to date. It's about 6% under plan. Purchase services, as with all the other non-personnel line items, continue to run under plan. 900,000 month to date under plan. Again, professional technical services, property services, electricity, and tuition top the list. And they range from 2.8 to 3.9 million under plan each. Charter, only 105,000 under plan month to date. As we received a partial restoration in our revenue in terms of the state aid payments being made to us, so did charter schools, and revenue to them is a deduction to us. So those deductions will have increased a bit to reflect the restoration or partial restoration of cuts to charter schools. Supplies and materials, 544,000 under plan month to date. Software and fuel are running year to date about 1.9 million and 2.6 million under plan respectively. Textbooks remain about 2 million over plan due to the previous large textbook and educational material supply purchase. Capital outlay also running under plan month to date, and that year to date variance has increased to 5.9 million under plan. And remember, the plan was based upon the forecast, which was the November forecast, which was based upon budgets, not an estimate of cash flow. And I mention that because we're going to change that methodology when we get to my 5-year forecast presentation. So the 5-year forecast and subsequent plans become more of a true cash flow plan document. Graphically, this look hasn't changed much from the previous month. You can see them running under plan. Chart is pretty close, but personnel's under and all other expenditures. If we break that out, you'll see here that purchase services leads the way. Since they continue to run under plan on a month-to-date basis, those year-to-date favorable variances continue and grow somewhat. And so this heat map hasn't changed a lot from last month. It's very much either on plan or in the green in terms of being favorable variances. Comparing to last year, total revenue, because we were under plan this month, we end up about 4.3% over last year. We were about 5.9% above last year, last month, as we looked at it. State aid continues to be above where we were last year, but keep in mind that dividend payment and the catch-up payment, the partial restoration of that reduction, and that really accounts for why we're ahead of last year. Otherwise, with the reduction, we would have been right. Had they not restored that, had we not received the dividend, we would have been right on top of last year's revenue stream from the state. On the expenditure side, you can see that personnel in total, about 6.3 million behind where we were last year at this time. It's broken down there for you. Personal services line 3.01, that's salaries and wages. Personal services is the accounting name we give to that line, but it's salaries and wages to everybody else. Charter, while it is about 5 million over last year, we're still 5.7 million under plan. Again, because the plan was the budgeted amount, and we do typically budget fairly high for this amount, for this expense, just to make sure we don't run into any appropriation problems. Supplies and materials, again, a textbook purchase present this year that wasn't last year is the explanation of why we're pretty significantly over where we were last year. I will note in the supply line that fuel is running about 2.2 million behind last year. Total operating, this line here, 4.5, is total operating expenditures, and they're now running about 5.8 million over where we were at this time last year. And all the other financing uses of funds, you can see advances out well ahead of where we were last year, but as I mentioned in previous reports, that has to do with monthly advances to the radio station, WCBE, as well as to Latchkey. So all in all, total expenditures compared to last year, about 1.1% over last year at 7.3 million above. We've have a better cash balance than we did at this time last year by about 85 million, and that's all good news. So in closing, kind of the same report as we've had for quite a few months here. Revenues are running ahead of plan, expenditures below plan. We build a cash balance. And I will talk more about my estimates for the end of this fiscal year as we move into the 5-year forecast. So that concludes my report for the month of March, and I'll answer any questions anyone might have as best I can.
Thank you so much, Treasurer Pahoric, for the presentation. Are there any questions for our good treasurer?
Yeah, I actually have one.
Go right ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, Mr. Treasurer, as we start moving past the pandemic and the financial results that kind of show are blippy because of that, are you going to, as you're looking at data, are you looking back to pre-pandemic and doing some comparisons that way so you can smooth through this this kind of weird financial situation where you have new monies coming in from CARES Act and other things as we kind of go post pandemic of this? I'm interested to hear how you're going to accommodate that.
Yeah, I'm going to have to pick a different dartboard to throw darts at, I think. But we have two very interesting years. Both fiscal 20 and fiscal 21 are odd years. You know, fiscal 20, the pandemic and its impact arrived in March, which was the ninth month of a 12-month fiscal year. And then during this fiscal year, just in February, the 8th month of the fiscal year, they do a partial restoration of that cut. So neither year is going to be a good example of certainly not month-to-month cash flow or year-over-year cash flow. And as you kind of indicated, I remember looking back further, when we get to the forecast, there are some line items where I looked back to 19 actually to get a better level and then trend that forward from there. So yeah, it does cause some, I'm not so much, well, when I get into the forecast, I'm not so much worried about month-to-month blips as I am year-over-year blips. But then this summer, when we put together next year's spending plan, we're going to have to either ignore some data or smooth it out somehow. Otherwise, our expectations for one month versus another month aren't going to work. When I do that plan, I pull data from, really all the way back to fiscal 13, and I have a matrix of the percent spent each month for every line. And you eyeball that. I do some averages. I look at it. We've got notes to say, this is some odd behavior at this time. Ignore that percentage. So we have to have a lot of narrative, in our consideration to help explain what some of those anomalies are. But yeah, we do our best, and the more years we have, obviously, the smoother we can make it. You can see there is one line item in here that's kind of interesting. I think it's the property tax allocation, where it looks like it's coming in over 3 months. And clearly I didn't just pick a month in one of those, which I know it's going to be 1 month, but historically when it moves around, you get that raggedness. So yeah, we're looking at that. It's an art, as you well know, but we are taking that into consideration.
It certainly creates challenges, and that's helpful to know kind of how you're thinking it and how your team's approaching it. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions? And thank you so much for that question, Jeff. I was wondering if you, in your next kind of iteration of your conversation, Mr. Treasurer, we're going to actually go through some of that. But I look forward to more reports. And again, are there any questions for our good treasurer? All right. If there aren't, is there anything else you said you had to add, Mr. Pahoric?
Not on the monthly financial report. I'm good to go there.
Okay. Then we can move forward then to our May update to the 5-year forecast.
See if I can. All right, thank you. This is the May 2021 update to the 5-year forecast. It's really updating the November of 2020 forecast. This is after it's presented to you. It will be presented to the board at their first meeting in May, on May 4th, and then they will subsequently approve it on May 18th, and it has to be filed by the end of May. This forecast, as the November one, covers fiscal years 18 through 20 on actual numbers, and then 21 through 25 is the forecasted portion of the forecast. You may note that I typically have in italics below those dates that fiscal years 26 through 28 are projected. In essence, I just trend them out because I like to include at least 8 years when we do some long-term planning. I've omitted them here because that's really going to be part of some of the discussions we have at Finance and Appropriations here when we start looking at the November 2021 ballot. The Finance and Appropriations Committee will kind of act as our millage committee. We had a millage committee, last year at this time, and they reported out to the board, and we did not go on the ballot last fall. But it will be up to FAC to review that data and that information and use this forecast to look out over the next 8 years to see, how are we doing? And when you see some of the graphs of the cash balance, realize that there are some unsustainable trends, but FAC will review that data and then be considering the need for an operating levy. We'll also consider issues related to life cycle replacement and the possibility for a permanent improvement levy. But that's why I've left those projected years out, because that discussion is yet to come. As I do with all my forecasts, I like to start off with put this in perspective and explain how difficult forecasting is and some of the variables that we have to face. And it's really as much an art as it is a science. We do have a legal requirement to file a forecast twice a year. November 30th is the first date that we have to hit. It used to be the end of October, but they moved that. That helps out with the November ballot issues being passed and being able to include any new revenues that might occur from that election period. We then update it somewhere between April 1st and May 31st of each fiscal year and file that then with the Ohio Department of Education. We can also update it any other time that significant events take place. And as I said, we use it as a working document. So we're in the midst of a lot of things here, both internally and externally, that can impact the forecast. And as major things happen, I'll be sure to use this document to update and let everyone know what the impact is. Ohio Department of Education provides some instructions on how to read a 5-year forecast, and I think those are good to read, but just a couple of quotes from them about how this is a painting of the future based upon a snapshot today. And the further out we go, the more likely it is that actual results will differ than what was planned. We have a lot of events that will ultimately impact our forecast. You probably are very aware of a lot of them, and that there are many variables outside of our control that will, in fact, impact our forecast. I think this last one is something that I wrote, that our forecast is really a snapshot of what we know today, and it's coupled with a long list of assumptions about the future and is subject to change. And in fact, there are certain things in this forecast that changed at the time I was actually doing the forecast. So I already know that some of the numbers in here will be modified in the future. So moving on, here's the May update to the 5-year forecast. My presentation is going to go top down from a very high level, kind of one-line summary, and then both revenue and expenditures. I'll then move into some major groupings of revenue and expenditures so you can see at a little bit of a macro level what those major groupings are doing. And then for those of you who like a lot of detail, you'll get close to getting into the weeds at looking each line item individually. I put this graphic up here so that those of you who only want to, where a summary is sufficient for you, you can kind of check out a listening some here when I move from the peak of the pyramid down to the major groupings. And those of you that find the information in the major groupings fine and don't want to listen to the line items, you'll know when I'm changing and getting into more details. So we'll move through it, but I will be doing revenue expense in both of those ways and bouncing back and forth to cover this forecast. So in summary, let's take a very high level look. This shows you the revenue and expenditures, the top two lines. And some things to take away from this graph. First of all, here in 21, you'll see that expenditures begin to exceed revenues. That's one of our first early warning indicators that we may need to make some adjustments. That fact that expenditures exceed revenues is evidenced by the slope of this line, the cash balance line. I've added a reserved ending balance line, the blue line, which is simply the ending cash less 30 days operating cash. I used to draw a 30-day cash line on there, but I think this is a little bit more graphic. The key here is when does that blue line go below zero, which is right out here in 25. So in 25, we will not meet our 30-day cash target. Just a very high level look there. Let's put some numbers to those large groupings. Revenues going to grow from 925 million in fiscal 18 to about 999 million almost in fiscal 25. That's an annual growth rate of about 1.1%. When we look at expenditures, our total expenditures, that growth rate's about 3.1%, 3.08%. And they will grow from 871 million in 18 to a little over a million, almost $1.1 billion in 2025. With revenue growth at 1.1% and expenditures at a little over 3%, you can see that that's an unsustainable situation, and hence the downward sloping cash balance line. This is revenue over and under expenditures. You can see that in 18 to 20, fiscal 18 to fiscal 20, we actually built a cash balance. For the next two fiscal years, we anticipate slight declines in the cash balance, and then it's in 23, 24, and 25 that we begin to deficit spend, and that deficit accelerates. Hence, the fact that the line is curved. If the deficit wasn't accelerating, it was if it was the same amount each year, it would be a straight line. It is not. It's a downward sloping line, indicating that that deficit accelerates over time. Let's go on to major groupings of our revenue and expenditures. Property taxes and state foundation are the two largest revenue sources, and then everything else is down each line at well under 100 million each on those lines. One thing to take away from this graph is to note the flat nature of these projected sources. Not much growth at all built into or anticipated for revenue over the forecast. Putting numbers to it on the three largest groups, property taxes at about a 1.8, 1.9% annual growth rate. I will tell you on a calendar year basis, as I project property tax collections, I factor in about 1.2% growth in off years and 2.5 to 2.8% growth in reappraisal and update years. That's every 3 years, 6 years for reappraisal and 3 years for updates. So that then results in that overall 1.8% growth rate. So you can see property taxes growing from 500 million to 570 million. Kind of in line with what Mr. Jordan mentioned, fiscal 18 is the first full year of tax collections under the new levy. So I can use 18 as a basis for comparison. In prior forecasts, back in fiscal year 20 and before, we had fiscal years 16, 17, 18, and 19 in those, and they had partial receipts of revenue from the new levy. And so you had to take that into consideration when you looked at trends. For state foundation program, very interesting how the numbers worked out. First, a couple of things. Here in 2021, this bump of at 374 million, that's the bump due to, as I've mentioned before, the Bureau of Workers' Comp payment. But then we flatten out here at 355.5 million for these years. We're projecting zero growth in state aid, and that 355 is $5 million above where we were in 20, which is that partial restoration of the cut, because we really back in 19 should be at 359. So you can see that the cut was once about $9 million. The cut's now $4 million, and that's how we get to 355.5. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing, but it works. I mean, those numbers are well displayed here in this graph. And quite frankly, as you well know, we're in the middle of state budget talks, and I have no idea where that might head. So property tax, this line, the gray line down here, property tax allocation, which is our homestead and rollback payment that flows through the state. It pretty much follows the property tax line, grows at about 1.7% each year. I ignored, in this case, FY 18 and 19 when I did that growth rate. That growth rate is from 20 to 25. I ignored 18 and 19 because in 18 and 19, we were still receiving reimbursement for the loss of personal property tax. So those 2 years are a little bit of an anomaly, and that's why it levels out here at 33 and then grows to 36 million during the forecast. Other local sources and non-operating revenues, other local sources, things like tuition, pilot payments, interest income. The bump here in 19 was a banner year for pilot payments at 22 million. They've not been that high in any other year. Out here in these 4 years of the forecast, I reduced my projection of investment income because over the past year, interest rates have fallen about 100, in the short end have fallen about 100 basis points. So we don't want to overestimate investment income. And in fact, this year it is coming in below our original projection. So I brought that back a bit. Non-operating revenues, mainly these are transfers and advances. And this drop right here in 25 is where some debt service is retired and we no longer have to make a transfer for that bus purchase debt. This graph is just another display of the dollar amounts. The bars behind those percentages are actual dollar amounts, but the percentages give you an idea of how much each of those revenue sources contribute to our overall income. 92% plus or minus a bit come from two sources, property taxes and state foundation. So you already know that, but just wanted to share with you why we watch those sources of revenue so closely. Moving on to expenditures. You see here, I've got them broken really into just two groups, personnel and non-personnel. The other two groups are kind of immaterial. They're fairly small. I'll explain these two blips in non-operating here in a minute. Putting numbers to it, personnel in total, you can see is going to grow from 580 million in 18 actual to about 725 million in fiscal 25. That's an annual growth rate of about 3.2%. Non-personnel is growing at a rate of about 2.1% from 18 to 25. On the non-operating expenses, the yellow line here, these are mainly transfers and advances. Back here in 19, this was the $30 million transfer that we did for the Dominion Brookhaven North program realignment. In 2021, this spike right here, I have included an $80 million transfer over to a PI fund to fund a 8 to 10 year bus purchase program. I'll be presenting that program to the Finance Committee in May, but I wanted to put it in the forecast at this point for planning purposes so that when we get there and you ask me what the impact is on the forecast if we execute that transfer, I can tell you that you've already seen the impact of that transfer in the forecast because it's here today. In 25 out here, you can see again, the transfer for debt service drops off as that bus debt from purchasing buses some 10 years or more ago drops off. Major expenditure groups, it's no shock that 97% of our expenditures are tied up in personnel and non-personnel. As I said, the other two lines are somewhat immaterial. This percentage differential here is because of the transfer I just discussed. But what's embedded here in the non-personnel line is something that we always like to break out, and that's charters and vouchers. You can see the charters and vouchers of that 30% or so. 23% of that is charters and vouchers. So those are our two largest expenditure categories, personnel, and then the deductions for charters and vouchers. Now, I'm sorry, let me back up for a minute. Personnel running at about 66, 67%. It's a little bit odd. If you look at other school districts, it's more likely to be in that 85 to 90 range. So this graph, I back out charters and vouchers. So if we weren't having those taken as a deduction, our normal expenditure percentages would look like this, where personnel is running 85, 86% of our overall expenses. So that's just another way to look at it. So it's not that we're spending less in personnel than other districts. It's just that we have a very large deduction for charters and vouchers. So now, those of you who want to get a little bit closer to the weeds, we've now gone through the major groupings, and some of those major groupings will match up line by line, but there are a lot more lines to discuss than how I had them summarized for you heretofore. Starting off with revenue, you can see that clearly property taxes, state aid was a major group in and of themselves, and I've talked about those, so I won't go over them again. But there are 6 other lines that I want to talk about a bit. Again, you've seen this. This is from before: property taxes, state aid, and the property tax allocation. Don't need to belabor that. But as we get into the other revenues, you can see here pilots, that's the bump there. This is the decrease in interest income estimates. This gray line is the qualified school construction bond reimbursement each year. You see it came up short here. 21 is probably going to be 0.7 instead of 0.5, but we'll see if we get that ultimately. Breakdowns of transfers, advances, and other funding, financing sources. Advances in is typically a function of advances out. Advances out are a function of what we need to do to help fund the cash flow on other funds. The green line, operating transfers in, that's really one of those debt service activities that really occurs over in the debt service fund, but has to be reflected here in the 5-year forecast because it is general fund related. But you can see that's flat to meet that debt service payment up until the time in 25 when it's paid off. And then other financing sources. What happened here in 19, this is when we received a county auditor refund of prior fees, and we posted that as a refund of prior year's expenditures. Subsequently in 20 and in 21, we treated them as a reduction of expenditure, but you can thank accounting conventions for that kind of variability. On to the expenditure side, you can see here, there's 11 expenditure lines compared to the few number that we had for revenues. Breaking personnel out, the personal services, salaries and wages, and benefits. Annual growth rate of about 3.4% in wages. Those wages include the negotiated wage increases through fiscal 22 and plus 1% across the board for all employees after that. So that would be in 23, 24, and 25. Fringe benefits, which in large part are a function of salaries and wages because they're based on a percentage of salaries and wages, things like retirement and workers' comp, but also in there are medical benefits that we've projected to increase at historical rates. Also included here in terms of personnel are numbers from the 5-year from the 5-year staffing plan. And as I said, in the 5-year plan, there's 259.65 FTE. That goes all the way out to fiscal 26, which isn't on the forecast at this time. So in this forecast, it's 241.65 FTE through 25. But to explain this further, I will pause my presentation and turn this over to Dr. Breeden, who will begin the presentation from the superintendent's team and explain to you what all is in our 5-year staffing plan and what good things they have planned for the future of the district. Dr. Breeden?
All right, I'm waiting for Scott to bring up our screen and we'll dive right in. There we go. I love it when a plan comes together. All right, let's go on into the academic services budget. Academic services is a very large department. And if we can go to the next slide, we'll begin to talk about half of the department, which is the Office of Special Education and Support Services. The other half of my department is teaching and learning. And so I've divided them up into 2 chunks, as I would say. All right, next slide. As you know, I came on board in September, and this is the first time I've done a budget in, hold on, why does the phone always ring? To really understand the budget, it really helped me to look at the organizational chart. So I have given you the same insight that I had. If this does not include every part of my department, because if there were no changes, I did not include them. But first, let's talk about the group called Compliance and Service Related. Speech pathologist is under this heading. And if you'll notice right now, if you wanted to look at the little bitty writing in the slide, you would see that presently we have 68 speech pathologists. Over the next 5 years, I'm asking for an increase of that to 15. Speech is identified many, many times with many of our students. This is an ongoing need. The other thing is that pathologists can only have 80 students on their caseload, and we are right at that bar right now. Occupational therapist is another important service for our students. We have 45 of those, and next year I'm asking for 5 additional occupational therapists. Physical therapists are also important. We have 23, and I also feel their caseloads are right at the maximum, and so we're asking for 5 of them. Psychologists are very much needed as we look at our students' social emotional needs and all the children who have issues that we need to resolve and help them as we support those things. Currently, we have 80 in our district, and over the next 5 years, there is a request for 15, with 5 of those being this year. If we can go to the next slide, we're going to talk about another aspect of student support, and that's really focused on the classroom. I will have to say, I've been in big districts, but before I came to Columbus, I was in Shaker Heights. And when I saw that the district only had 5 behavior specialists, I was very surprised, because that's about how many we had in Shaker Heights with 7,000 students. And they are critical to our success in keeping students in the mainstream, and also supporting teachers understanding the best procedures to help a child remain in the classroom. So over the next 5 years, we're increasing that, and we're beginning next year by adding 5 behavior specialists. I think this will really help us as we try to have the least restrictive environment for all of our students. We have a lot of needs in adaptive PE. We're asking for 5 more adapted PE teachers. We need transition coordinators to make sure our transitions for our students go well, whether it's from middle school to high school, or for high school on to their career or their college education. We have 1 person who helps us with assessment and data, all the testing accommodations, and we think we need 2, because that is a tremendous amount of work, making sure that all the modifications are ready when students are assessed. Inclusion coaches will really help us do more, push into our classroom services rather than pulling students out and then missing instruction. We have a major training effort going on this summer. And so we're going to be really spending next year training and starting some things. And then we want to add these coaches to reinforce the training on a day-to-day basis once the teachers are back in the classroom implementing what they've learned. In special ed, it is a huge department, and there was a cut at one time I think it was last year, of a supervisor, and we want to bring that supervisor out. It's left a gap that we feel we need to restore. We're asking for 5 additional IAs, and this is very, very important to us. While you look and you say, oh my gosh, you've got 461, why do you need 5 more? And the reason is every day an IEP is done, and many times they require the services of an instructional assistant, and we do not have someone hired ready to begin, which puts off beginning the services or stretching the services really, really thin. So this is a proactive move to help us with that problem. All right, next slide is just other student supports. And I don't think it will surprise you to see nurses listed there. Until you have a pandemic, you don't think about as nurses as much as we have this year. But we have been asked, does every school have a nurse? And the answer is no. So over the next 5 years, to make sure that every school has a nurse and we maintain the nurse support, such we have some specialized nurses that work, let's say, with students with diabetes that have expertise in that, but to keep a nurse in every school and keep our specialized nurses and our supervised nurses in place, we would need to add 25.5 nurses to have that comprehensive nursing service in our district. Another thing that we've learned during the pandemic is we need some coordination with graduation, keeping all the services and the things that we offered. Sometimes we lose some efficiency because we lack coordination. Yes, we have guidance counselors. Yes, schools have graduation coaches, and we have a lot of things going on, but the coordination really needs someone to keep their eye on the ball. And so we're asking for that. And then we need some additional childcare attendance with our orthopedic impaired students. And so that is a request. So I believe at that point, you have seen the first half of my department. And now we're going into teaching and learning. I hope that you see in this budget some things that we've been working on as initiatives and that you'll understand why we're requesting the things that we are. In gifted and talented, we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of wonderful things that we're wanting to do. And we believe if we had another gifted supervisor, that we will be able to meet our goals. And there is a tremendous amount of correspondence, communications associated with gifted services. And so we're also asking for some clerical support in the way of a secretary for our gifted department. We want people to get their questions answered, and we feel that will help us improve customer service. In our next shop, you will see this is very exciting, and I've got to be careful because everyone behind me does not want me to go on and on about this. But when we had to go to virtual learning, we were rather flat-footed. We did not have what I'm calling a learning technology department ready to go. And so people had to pick up the pieces, and they've done a beautiful job, and we've learned so much, but we don't want to be in that situation again. You will notice in the first 3 years of the 5-year forecast, I have 0 requests. But that's because we have looked for efficiencies and we've repurposed some positions. We have also looked at our Title I funding. We've looked at our IDA funding, and we've also looked at the additional funding we're getting in the ESSER funds. So we think we're okay for the next 3 years. We also think we need more people now than we will then. And so what will we need in years 4 and 5 when some of the funding goes away? We do not want to face a cliff. We want to plan carefully. And so that's why you'll see the positions in year 4 and 5 and not in 1, 2, and 3. These are allowable expenses under the federal grant, and they certainly are related to how we found ourselves in the pandemic and the needs identified. So I'd love to come back and talk more about that, but I'm going to keep rolling here. Next, I'd like to talk about blended ed is what you know as the Digital Academy. We have had several bumps in the road. We had to stand it up in 3 days, and it's totally understandable, but we have such a better plan moving forward. And in this particular request, we are asking for 2 more teacher on special assignments to help us do some of the work that we've discovered that we will be doing, I think is the quick way to talk about that. And we do want them to be teachers because we think the expertise they bring there will be invaluable to us. On to our next slide, which is the elementary curriculum. We're in pretty good shape there, except we really want to emphasize reading and literacy. And so over the next 5 years, we're asking for 4 literacy coaches and specialists. Teaching reading is difficult. We don't want our teachers to struggle. We want them to understand all the new curriculum that we have, all the new research on how to teach reading. And we believe this will help teachers do even a better job and help us reach our strategic goals. The other thing, and I was surprised about behavior specialists, and another thing that really surprised me was how much money we invest in math personnel. We spend less on math than we do social studies, science, and reading. And we cannot ignore math. And so we are asking for an elementary school math coordinator to help us really keep our eye on the ball and that we don't forget about math. Can't do that. I used to be a math teacher, and our students, our math scores are in great need also. If you go to the secondary curriculum, you'll see the next slide, you'll see kind of the same pattern. We're asking for a secondary math specialist and also a secondary literacy specialist. We have a lot of students who are not reading on grade level at the secondary level, and we need to focus on that also. If we'll go to the next slide, we also have professional licensure in my shop, and there is a ton of work making sure everyone stays licensed, that we do a lot of work with our new teachers. There is just bucket loads of work over there, and Rhonda Rice has done a beautiful job, but she is telling us it is becoming just too much for her to manage by herself. So we're adding a supervisor to support her and make sure that we keep our workforce fully licensed, fully prepared to step in the classroom each and every day. And that is a much needed request. Finally, you will see English as a second language. We really, really, really need to add to our translators, especially in the 5 languages that are the most oftenly needed in the district. We have students enrolling, their parents do not speak English. We have communications that we need help with getting them translated. We just need help each and every day, and the work is massive, and we cannot do everything we can do, and communication is central to the work. It would be a shame for parents not to know everything that our English-speaking parents know. So that is where that request comes from. So if you go to the next slide, you will see the request in one list, and the next slide gives the grand totals for my shop. And there it is. There's the grand total. This year, we're asking for 60 additional positions, and over the 5 years, that will total 126.5 positions.
I will say, I don't know that Dr. Klein is on the meeting yet, so we may want to skip ahead to operations.
And Scott, if I could, I'll just mention that we are going to pause once again after the staffing plan presentation and address any questions about the staffing plan that committee members may have before I then resume the rest of my presentation on the 5-year forecast. I forgot to mention that when we got started.
Scott, I am on.
All right, welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. It is my privilege to present the accountability personnel request for fiscal year 22 through 26. It will be much shorter than the academic asks, as it certainly should be. In the Office of Information Management next year, we would like to add 1 Educational Systems Data Analyst 1 to handle the influx of data requests and help desk tickets to our student information management system, Infinite Campus. This will allow us to complete rigorous testing of our new releases that occur on a monthly basis, as well as help create new custom forms for our users, such as graduation plans, attendance plans, rent plans, health plans, etc. We will be able to create ad hoc and custom reports to meet our customers' needs in a more timely fashion. Since we implemented Infinite Campus 9 years ago, we have not expanded our team, but the usage and amount of connections between Infinite Campus and third-party systems continues to grow. The second request is in the Office of Assessment and Program Evaluation and Research. As a result of the PDK audit, we would like to add 2 program evaluation coordinators for fiscal year 22 who will lead the program evaluation framework, and 1 research assistant who would be responsible for approval and implementation of both internal and external research projects for the district. Our current team of data analysts do an excellent job at routine data request and the loading of student information into the SAS program, as well as the data extracts and loading for TIDE. But they are not actual educators and do not have a robust knowledge of curriculum pedagogy. In fiscal year 23, we would like to add 1 supervisor in the Division of Assessment and Program Evaluation in order to appropriately supervise all research, formative and summative assessments, as well as work on testing irregularities and value added, which are state and federally mandated. Also in fiscal year 23, in order to round out the needs identified by the PDK audit, we would like to hire 1 statistician who would be responsible for statistical analysis within the Division of Research Program Evaluation and Assessment. In fiscal year 24, we would add 1 additional program evaluator in order to facilitate the complete audit findings of the PDK audit regarding our program evaluation teams. That rounds out the accountability requests for fiscal year 22 through 26, and there are no staffing requests past fiscal year 24 for the Department of Accountability at this time. Thank you so much.
Good evening. Today I'm here to go over the staffing, 5-year staffing requests for business operations. In business operation, you will see that I request focus on safety and security. The mission of safety and security the Office of Safety and Security is dedicated to excellent service that impacts the reduction in crime, creates a safe environment, and enhance the quality of life for our students and community. What you notice in FY22, we're asking for a total of 20 FTEs. In those 20 FTEs, we're asking for 18 safety and security specialists. And those safety and security specialists are staff that's responsible for providing safe security for students, employees, parents, and the visitors. And also to ensure that the safety measures are in compliance with U.S. Department of Homeland Security. The rationale for those staff members is to provide a safe and secure learning environment, to aid in the reduction of crime and increase student success, and to reduce student disruptions and improve school climate and culture. The next position we asked for, the 18, is 1 FTE. It's an administrative supervisor position. And this position would be one who supervises the daily activities of safety security supervisors, implements safety security standard policy procedures, coordinates security for district events and staff assignments, and serves in the absence of the Director of Safety Security. The rationale is to support the department's structure and span of control. It also allows this position to focus on impacting student success by way of staffing strategies, safety initiatives, and other support. And then it also allows the current number 2 position to focus solely on the physical security for the district, so out in the field. The other position that we have listed is a position that's a safety security supervisor. And this supervisor, the goal of safety security is to move towards aligning our staff to the regional approach based on the regions that we have throughout the district, 6 regions. This person would be the security point of contact for each region. They would be responsible for the first line supervision of safety and security specialists, and also consults regularly with administrator, area superintendents, and local support agencies. The rationale is to support department structure and span of control, and also supervise to ensure all regional security needs are being addressed. You would notice over our span of 5-year period, FY22, as I stated, is 20 FTEs. FY23 is additional 18 safety security specialists. 24 is additional 17 security specialists and an additional supervisor to focus on the regional approach. FY25 is 18 safety security specialists. FY26 is 7 safety security specialists, which gives us a total acts over the 5-year period of 83 FTEs. But if you break that down, it's 1 administrator, it's 4 supervisors, and 78 safety security specialists. That will put our total staffing over a 5-year period, it takes us up to 167 FTEs. That's business operations. Next, I think it's communications.
Thank you, Mr. Oldham. Good evening. I'm here to talk about the staffing request for the Department of Communications. My first position is a digital specialist for the Office of Customer Relations, which is included in the Department of Communications. Our current customer relations staff does an excellent job of responding to and mitigating stakeholder concerns and issues, especially for our families. Customer relations is a long-standing and well-established function for CCS. As we consider where we've been over the past year in a largely virtual and digital environment, a need has arisen to look at how we address this new normal for the future. Our families and our stakeholders have grown accustomed to engaging with our district online, and I believe we need to use emerging technologies to offer them a more streamlined and convenient process. This new position would give customer relations a stronger digital presence to handle website live chats, manage information in an online search platform, coordinate a CRM or customer relationship management system, and respond to social media comments and questions. Next are 6 marketing and communications specialists that would be assigned 1 to each of the 6 regions. And these positions directly correlate with our priority to create strong learning communities in each region. A specialist would be assigned to each of the 6 regions to focus on 2 areas. First, improving and supporting building level communications. Each specialist would have a small group of principals and schools to work with, allowing them to provide a more hands-on, intensive approach to support their work, similar to a small school district. Second, as we consider strategic marketing, each school could have enrollment goals. Specialists would work with the principals to establish marketing goals and strategies that reach families on a grassroots level. And so over the course of this proposal, that would include 7 total positions for the Department of Communications. And that concludes my department. Now turn it over to our Chief of Engagement, Ms. Alicia Gellison.
All right, and thank you so much, Scott, and thank you for the opportunity to kind of present our information here during this meeting. So our Department of Engagement is set up with authentic engagement opportunities and efforts to reach every part of our community. Vulnerable youth, our homeless youth, our ELL families, and our students and parents, creating that ecosystem of support for our students. Currently in the department, I have an executive director that is over strategic engagement and family and community engagement, which is our family ambassadors. And the goal is to have at least 1 family ambassador, and that's the family liaison, in every building. And we also have an executive director that works with our homeless youth, the homeless shelters, and all of our outreach efforts. And what we are asking for is 1 secretary 2 for efficiency to help coordinate the work of our 2 executive directors. And that concludes our ask from the Department of Engagement. Thank you. And I will turn it over to Dr. Dion Blue, our Chief Equity Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gillison. Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. My ask is probably the shortest of everyone. I just have 1 request, which is a diversity coordinator. As you know, we're a team of 1. You're looking at my entire department right now. So my goal is to expand that out a bit so that we can start doing the work of equity for the district. So the only ask I have that will impact the general fund is the equity coordinator, which will be someone who will help to create some of the professional development modules that we'll need for to complete the goals that we have around equity, as well as some of the other plans that we have that we'll be putting in place, I should say, for to address the strategic plan and the strategic priorities and the board guardrails around equity. And that concludes my request. And I will turn it over to Ms. Myra Wright for Human Resources.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am here to discuss the Department of Human Resources. As you know, we had a HR audit by the Council of Great City Schools. And as a result of the audit, it was determined that there were a number of changes that we needed to make in the department. And so in looking at our staffing, we have agreed to add the following positions. We are looking at a personnel coordinator, compensation and classification. This role would be responsible for compensation projects, job audits, and requests in redesigning of our comp structures for our different business groups. And the next position that we're looking at is labor management for business partner. We want to be able to build out the department so that we can continue to have strong relationships with our administrators in terms of interpreting the contract, following the contract, and basically having the ability to be more responsive to our customers. The next position we're looking at is a director of strategic staffing. And that position would focus on overseeing the execution of plans and activities with respect to a district-wide focus of how we do our staffing. The strategic staffing team is responsible for hiring, but to have a position that is focused on how we leverage our hiring and staffing throughout the district is going to be critical to the success. The team is going to provide support to the principals and managers in developing their individual staffing plans, such as what you're seeing today. And so we feel that position will be very helpful moving forward. We're also looking at the request for another HR generalist. As you know, we need to have focus on our substitute teaching and other substitute hiring. So that position would be for that. The manager of school leadership recruitment and pipelines is a position to obviously continue with the work with the Department of Transformation and Leadership. And we need a dedicated resource to manage those activities. We are also asking for a human resources assistant to assist with substitute management, and then a employee benefits coordinator and a human resources assistant, and then finally a manager of strategic performance to provide strategies around growth while evaluating the organization's brand as an employer of choice. They will reimagine our standard operating procedures. And as you can see, we've spread this out over the entire 5-year forecast, asking for 4 positions that are critical to us moving forward. In the first year of 22, 2 in 23, 3 in 24, for a total of 9. And this concludes my presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin O'Connor, sitting in for Carolyn Smith, and Office of Internal Audit proposal. In fiscal year 22, we're requesting 2 auditors, 1 academic auditor. Currently, the Office of Internal Auditor has 1 internal auditor assigned to the academic side of the house. This individual has responsibility for all things within academic services and accountability, including our annual audits of schools. Given the significance and importance of academics to the school district and its stakeholders, this additional auditor will enable OIA to aid board and management oversight by verifying internal controls are operating as management intends, risk management is effective, compliance with laws and regulations, and proper alignment with the goals of the district. The other position in fiscal year 22 is an information technology auditor. Given the speed of change within information technology and the numerous hacks that have gone on recently to district technology platforms throughout the country. For example, Baltimore schools had catastrophic systematic interruption to network information systems that cost them 2 days of instruction. Broward County schools disrupted online learning and a $40 million ransom was requested to get their data back. Buffalo schools had a loss of 3 days of instruction, and Huntsville, Alabama schools had a virtual academy that had to go to paper assignment packets, and they advised students to not use laptops or other school issued devices. So it is critical that an information technology auditor be on staff to help evaluate and enhance the effectiveness of IT risk management, control, and governance processes. Fiscal year 24, we're requesting one auditor. It will be a capital project analyst auditor. And again, given the size of previous capital project packages, it's critical that we have an Office of Internal Auditor assigned and available to work with district staff on the project as it progresses through various stages. This will help to promote accountability, transparency, and help to evaluate and enhance the effectiveness of risk management, control, and governance processes. And our final request is fiscal year 25, we're requesting one auditor, and this would be another information technology auditor. As the enterprise-wide IT work continues, a knowledgeable and experienced IT auditor would need to be brought in to continue this work, as well as free up the IT segment manager to complete the comprehensive IT risk assessment, which currently is outsourced. We'd like to bring that in-house. And that's what that position would help do. And that concludes our request, and I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Angela Chapman.
Good evening. I have the pleasure of presenting the staffing request for the Office of Transformation and Leadership. For the Office of Transformation Leadership, for my department, we are not making any additional staffing requests at this time, but we do have requests from our school buildings. There's one position for a PE allocation for Columbus Downtown High School. That request is on the staffing request before you. And then the additional requests are for 20 allocations for our new World Language Middle School. As you know, we are opening our new World Language Middle School in the fall, and there were additional positions that were needed, but we were able to reallocate positions from a few of our other schools. So the 20.40 allocations that are presented here are the additional allocations that are needed to fully staff the new World Language Middle School. And that concludes the staffing request for the Office of Transformation and Leadership.
So
Okay, are we all done? Can I take from that you've concluded all of that? I didn't add them up in my head, but I'm pretty sure you touched base on everything.
Yes, that's everything.
Chair Cole, I thought we could pause here. That was a very significant portion of the 5-year forecast, and I thought that if we wanted to, we could stop, and if anybody had any questions regarding the staffing plan in particular, we could address those now. And if it would be okay, if we get those addressed now, then we can let that side of the house and their staff that are present here to leave the meeting and proceed with their other activities this evening, unless they'd like to stay around to listen to the rest of the line by line 5-year forecast. So I'll turn it over to you, Chair Cole, for questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Treasurer. I agree. I think that this would be the opportune time to do our Q&A around these matters. What I would like to do, though, is let's not get too much in the weeds, if we will, of the academics or the day-to-day, if we can. This is a presentation being given to the Finance and Appropriations Committee, thus opportunity to discuss the fiscal impacts of this and where these investments are important to the progress of the district. But I want to caution us not to get too deep into the weeds, if we may. But please proceed. Are there any questions at this point? Okay,
Well, that was simple.
I know. I did have just one question about the HR investment, and where we will optimally see that return on investment in improving the efficiencies of HR. I saw you had some key positions available, but I just wanted to get an idea of long run, what you're looking at in terms of ROI for the district with this investment.
Well, I'm going to turn that over to Michael, because when you go long term, he and I have talked about with respect to the needs that we had, because when I met with you last, I indicated that after having an opportunity to work with the team that we currently have, and as we look at moving forward in terms of what the vision is going to be, our executive director definitely handles the day-to-day operations, so I'll let him speak to that.
Board Member Cole, thank you for your question. So we're actually working on in terms of transforming the department, a 3-year transformation. The first year, the focus will be realigning the overarching departments within HR and creating a new customer focus. The second year, we will focus on what are we going to automate? What are we going to continue to do internally? What are we going to do externally? And what is going to shift? In that third year will be new job descriptions, new titles, and a refocus on what will maintain internal and what will be pushed out. So we have a plan in place over the next 3 years to really, and you'll see in terms of our positions, we've forecasted out for only those 3 years, specifically to do that work. So that when we move into that third year, we should be a very different department here. It should be a very customer-focused department, both internal and external. You'll see the positions that we are looking into are more strategic, whereas in the past, we've been much more focused on pushing paper. We're not going to do that anymore. We're going to let the systems push the information for us, and we'll focus on strategy and management. Based on some of the conversations we had on Monday about our guardrails, we're going to be far more intentional on how we staff within the organization. And the return on investment for all of that work should be a better alignment between our fiscal resources and getting our staff where we need them to be. And so it's really about creating the HR department to back all that work up.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that. I think that answers my question.
So the biggest thing too is that, as you know, I've been here and will be leaving. The basic premise is that we're going to go from being more transactional to moving into the 21st century. So I'm very, very excited about the opportunity. Dr. Dixon has been very supportive in the work that we've needed. I've come back to help us get on that pathway, and very confident where the department is heading and where we're going. Very excited about the opportunities that are now being afforded to the HR team. So I asked when I came back that she would listen, and she heard. And as you see, we're able to put in far more positions than I know that we've had in my entire tenure here. So I'm very happy that, you know, that the board has been supportive, and obviously Dr. Dixon has been supportive of the needs. And the direction that we're going in is very exciting because there's great partnerships. Terry, I know you're leaving too, but I mean, with Angela and Terry and the things that Michael and all of us have been talking about, the leveraging that we're doing with HR, it's just going to be an exciting time for the entire organization. So I appreciate your support. I'm hoping that we continue with the support, and you will definitely see a difference. I've already seen a difference in the past year. So you'll see, you're going to see great hires.
Thank you so much for that. Unless there are any short comments from Dr. Dixon, we can move right on into Mr. Behort, but thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you again. And one of the things that we talked about early on with HR and with other departments that we wanted, the board has allowed me to do several audits or assessments. And we did not want to make hastily decisions about how our organization should be staffed. We wanted to make sure we were very intentional, and we received advice from expert organizations who help facilitate these audits and assessments. And so thank you. And Myra alluded, remember Myra was a part of the organization. I asked her to come back and lead HR when I was hired. And one of the things I was committed to, as she stated, that we make sure that we operationalize that department the best we could. We staff it. We're very intentional. And thank you again to Myra for listening and we're leading us rather, and making sure we had an audit that's going to guide our next steps. And Dr. Breeden, who came on, and she came on too for a year, and she's leaving us. But she too has been following the guidance of the PDK audit and making sure that we allow the audit to lead us and how we're going to staff our academics team moving forward. So to everyone here, we want you to know that we've been very intentional in allowing the results of the audits and assessments to lead us and facilitate on how we should staff the organization. And so the return on that investment, I think, is making sure that we continue to follow those guidance. We report back to the board those recommendations that the audit provided, so the board and our entire organization will know how we are a better and a stronger and a more efficient organization because we followed those recommendations closely. So we had some experts that help us, some experts who help put the plans in place, and just really excited that we were able to have Myra come back and Terry with us as we get through these next steps. And the last thing is, there are some additional positions that are not general funds. So we know there's a grant side, but we only presented the general fund positions. And so we wanted to make sure we, at that stretch, that these are general fund positions. These are positions that we believe can continue, because we know grant fund positions are going to be time bound. And we want to be very clear that those funds, those positions that are tied to grants, they're time bound, therefore it's a specific purpose in time. But these positions that we know that we need in the organization, because we do not want to build a cliff. We wanted to say, hey, these are positions in the organization we need for an organization our size to be better, efficient, and operate effectively. And we believe this is it. So thank you, and thank you to the great team that we have and the great leaders who are making sure that this work keeps moving forward.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon. All right, Mr. Behort.
Thank you. And see, Chairman Cole, I think I've trained them on the other side of the house well. One, they've learned not to create recurring expenses out of non-recurring income. And two, they're using the catchphrase cliff, as in fiscal cliff. And that's something that many of my colleagues are very concerned about with all the additional federal funding that we're getting, that we're going to create recurring expenses. And then all of a sudden, 3-4 years down the road, it hits us in the face. So I have been preaching and the choir has been listening, I think. So that's good. And I appreciate that. But we are working hand in hand. What we do, operationally, whether it's with non-personnel expenses or personnel-related expenses, we are trying to utilize those short-lived grant monies to leverage them, if you will, as best we can. So this is just one piece of the puzzle. So I think we're doing a great job so far in working collectively and collaboratively to put together a great program here going forward. So I'm pretty excited. So yeah, I am ready to continue. And I believe we left off right here. So after personnel comes the purchase services line. And again, these lines are based on a percent of budget to move that estimate in the forecast closer to what we expect the actual expenditure levels to be. For instance, in purchase services, in total, it's about 94% of the budget that's been asked for. In 22, for example, the budget is 312.4 million, but in the forecast we have the estimate in there at 295.2 million. So this will be, this is how we're going to do all the other lines. This is an annual growth rate of about 3.1% for purchase services. We break out purchase services where we show what charter is doing and what the remainder of purchase services without charter and vouchers looks like in the forecast. And without the vouchers, this growth rate is about 2.2. And this line for vouchers reflects somewhere between 10 and 13 million below what is actually being budgeted. We look at supplies and materials and capital outlay. Again, based on the percent of what's budgeted. As you can see here, these are the textbook and educational material purchases happening in these 4 years that bumped that line up. There was, I believe, a purchase back here as well. But you can see how that jumps up a bit and then begins to tail off in the latter years. Nothing exciting about capital outlay. It's a small line. We try and do capital outlay from other sources, but it's running in that 3 to 4 million range, generally speaking. So this is all of our debt-related expenditures in the forecast. You'll see here that they drop off when that debt service is repaid. The interest and fiscal charges are declining as debt is paid off. And then this line at 0.7 is the QSQB debt service. It stays constant throughout the forecast. Other objects, mainly auditor and treasurer fees. Right here in 20 is when we got a refund. That's why that isn't a straight line. And they gradually increase over time. Here are advances out. I've already discussed these two spikes with you. And then they level out back at about a 4.3 level for transfers out. Again, dropping off here when debt service is retired. I want to do some comparison data for you to see where we were and how we got to where we are today. The first comparison will be how I came up with the end of the year estimates and look at the plan versus our end of year estimate to see what kind of improvements in cash balance we will achieve here in fiscal 21. And then I'll look at the out years, fiscal 22 to 25, and make that comparison for you where we're now doing this forecast based upon actual cash flow, actual expenditures that we anticipate versus doing it on a budgeted basis. I want you to take a look here. This is our plan here in this column, the total plan, and it is based on the FY20 forecast, November 2020 5-year forecast. So this comparison to plan is like a comparison to that November forecast to see what's changed. This column is my end of the year estimate. Then the change, just to give you an idea of the dollar amount that we're talking about and its impact on the bottom line. I've included these two columns, the current revised budget and the year-to-date expense through March, just as points of reference and information, but I won't be discussing that. So in this particular case, you can see the general property tax anticipated at the end of the year about 1.8 up over the plan. We now know from the previous conversation will be closer to 6, But as I said, things changed while I was doing the forecast. So I got the forecast done before I knew what the actual results would be for that settlement period. But we know that number will be a little bit different, but not terribly material to this discussion. State aid, we know, about 27.6 up for the dividend and the casino monies. This property tax change is merely a rounding issue over the years. Over the year, it's not much, it's really not going to be that much different. All of the revenues is really the drop in interest income. So you can see here that on the revenue side, up to this point, about 22 million above plan we anticipate for the end of the year. On the expenditure side, you can see personnel. This is broken out salaries and wages and retirement. Those two lines together are like 27 million under plan. Vouchers will come in about 13 million under plan, and purchase services, absent the vouchers, about 20 million under plan. Supplies and materials capital outlay will continue that under plan trend at 5.7 and 8.8 by the end of the year under plan. So for total operating expenditures, we expect to be about 7.7% under plan, about $76.6 million. We get to the non-operational expenditures, the line item for transfers. You can see here the $80 million transfer. And with that transfer in place, assuming we get approval to do that, we'll end the year pretty much spot on in our total expenditures in terms of what we planned and what we actually expend. This indicates about 4 million above plan, or less, 0.4%. That's really pretty immaterial on $1 billion expenditure, but that's where we would stand on expenditures by the end of the year. What does that mean to cash balance? That means that while we had planned this year to spend down the beginning balance by about 35 million, we'll only spend it down by about 17 million, and that we will, instead of ending a cash balance at 250, we'll be closer to 268 with that $17.9 million improvement between revenue and expenditures. I want you to remember this number right here, 17.9, because it's going to come into play in my next discussion of the out years, fiscal 22 through fiscal 25. There'll be a lot of detail here, but we can move quickly. On the revenue side, I've made some adjustments in property tax collections based upon experience. Not terribly meaningful, because over that 4-year period, I add $8 million to the forecast, or just 0.4%. Here you can see in state aid, that's the partial restoration of the cut. I included that, and it's a flat forecast. So I've included that in all 4 years. That adds 23.2 million in revenue over that 4-year period, or about 1.7% of the total expected in that 4-year period. This is the reimbursement for the Q-Scooby interest. And the reason why it's here in May and it wasn't in November is because I omitted it. I've just an oversight on my part. Either I erased the data in the cell or simply forgot to put it in, but it wasn't there in November, but we pick up $1.5 million there. Not terribly meaningful in terms of dollar amount, but nothing new there other than just a faux pas on my part. Property tax allocation, really kind of a rounding error when I make these adjustments up here. There's some adjustments that happen down here in property tax allocation. So that, again, very small change there. All other revenues, this is really a decline in my investment income estimates, pulling about almost $27 million out of the forecast. Operating revenues up to this point, really not meaningfully changed, but up about 4.9 million over that 4-year period. No real meaningful changes here. Other financing sources are really refund related. Back down that estimate a bit. And then overall, in grand total expenditure revenues for the forecast period, for this period, about 1.7 million is being added in revenue. So we're usually pretty close always on revenue. And so I'm not surprised by these relatively minor changes. When we get on the expenditure side, this is kind of in reference to Mr. Jordan's question, and looking back, I've adjusted some of the salary and benefit calculations out into the future, reduced that over the 4-year period by less than 1%, but it adds up to almost $18 million in wages and benefits and $7 million I'm sorry, in wages, salaries and wages, and $7 million in benefits. So between them, that's close to $25 million that will be coming back in terms of personnel that I've reduced those projections. Purchase services, absent charter, again, on a budget basis. When we factor that in, about 13 million a year, totaling 54 over that 4-year period. Likewise, for charter and vouchers, we budget fairly high, see 226, 233. We believe that the actual expenditures will be 13. As I said earlier, it said it was 10 to 13 million lower than we were anticipating, so we've taken that out. And supplies and materials, that actual to budget differential, as you can see here, 6.3, 3.5, 3.2, 5.9, a total of 19 million over that 4-year period that we're going to reduce the overall expenditure estimates for that line item. Capital outlay, likewise, only a little bit larger in terms of percentage, 9% reduction over that 4-year period because of the budget to actual behavior. Nothing really else notable on that page. We get down here to about total operating expenditures, a reduction over this 4-year period of roughly 40 million a year on average to total 160 million improvement as far as reducing our expenditures is concerned. We get down to the bottom line, we'll see that total expenditures, both operating and non-operating, we have about $158 million reduction in expenditure estimates for this 4-year period. Again, 44, 37, 30 units, it's 3% reduction here in each of these years. And what that leads to is that our original forecast back in November of 2020 showed a $106 million deficit in fiscal 25. We're going to swing to 71.8 positive, which is 177.8 million improvement. As you can recall, I asked you to remember a number, 17.9 from my revenue projection. It shows up right here as 17.8 due to a little bit of rounding, but the 160 improvement here in excess of revenue over expenditures for this 4-year period, plus the 17.8 that we picked up in FY21 gives you the 177.8 right here in terms of improvement in ending cash balance from November to May. My final summary, going back to a very high level, this is all 5 years and how things have changed. Picked up 21.9 in fiscal 21, a tad bit in each of these 3 years in terms of revenue for a total of 23.6 increase in revenue over the forecast since November. Expenditures down about 154.3. That changes the impact on the cash balance to be 177.9. So where we were at 6 and we moved to 71.8, it's 177.8 improvement. That pretty much balances out. Because this is such a large budget and a 1 or a 2% change or variance can be tens of millions of dollars. This is why I didn't raise any red flags back when we projected a $106 million deficit. I knew that, as I call it, organically, that could be addressed as expenditures come in under budget. Now that we've changed our philosophy and our methodology for preparing this is to be closer to actual case expenditures, this document then becomes even more meaningful when we get into our discussions about levy planning, because we have taken some of that cushion out of this forecast and become closer and closer to what we, in terms of certainty about what the actual expenditures may be. That's it for the forecast. So what's next? This is a quick list that I pulled together, and I'm sure you may be able to enumerate some other events that are out there that are looming that may impact our forecast. But first, we've got the state budget discussions that are currently going on. I think I hear almost daily from Dr. Roush about some of the discussions and changes and amendments made to bills at the State House relative to the budget and school funding. We have discussions still about the brand new fair school funding formula and where that's going to head. We have student wellness and success funds. We don't know how those are going to be treated. They're resurrecting some old terminology like disadvantaged pupil impact aid, and different ways to address students with economic needs, economic disadvantaged needs, how they're going to fund them and what restrictions they might put on those dollars. So that's all up in the air. We, as you well know, during a budget season, they have until the end of June to try and resolve those. And sometimes they even go beyond that deadline. So we really won't know how that's going to, work its way out. But that's certainly a large item out there looming for us. It's a 2-year budget, so that will address fiscal 22 and 23. And as you know, 24 and 25 are in our forecast. And as we plan for a levy, we're really looking out there in 26, 27, and 28 to how do we maintain financial, how do we sustain our financial position from a revenue standpoint out that far, not having any certainty about what the state budget is going to do. We are involved in ongoing strategic planning. The board members here know that. We have meetings on that here just this past week. And a critical part of that on strategic planning will undoubtedly be staffing. And so while they did a great job in preparing a staffing plan for the next 5 years or for this meeting today, there's still discussions going on about staffing needs. And I'm sure there will be changes down the road, perhaps additions and or deletions to our staffing needs as we go forward, but that will certainly impact the forecast. We have wage negotiations with our bargaining units coming up in this year and next year. And I told you what I've included there as placeholders for those types of increases. I mentioned earlier, just as I began this, or resumed my presentation about a fiscal cliff and watching what's going on with how we spend those federal dollars and not wanting to create a fiscal cliff. But if we do have the opportunity to be very innovative and use those dollars as a jumpstart to our program, then we may want to plan to include those positions or those materials or whatever it is, those program costs later in the forecast, should we choose to continue those programs. So we're doing that on an ongoing basis. Again, we'll be doing levy planning here at the Finance and Appropriations Committee over the next 12 months. We'll review what happened at the 2020 Millage Committee, what work they did in those presentations. And we'll be evaluating the district's need and the feasibility of placing an operating levy and or a permanent improvement levy to address those life cycle replacement items. We'll be assessing that over the next 12 months here at various FAC meetings. And last but certainly not least, there is also an ongoing FMP process that's running concurrently. Undoubtedly, those typically lead to a bond issue, which is a longer term, borrowing capital improvement dollars mechanism. They are evaluating our facility needs, the need to align that to our strategic plan. And they'll be dealing with those larger capital improvements, building, construction, renovation, and right sizing our facilities to fit our student needs and academic programming. So those are some of the events on the horizon that are unknowns. Again, the forecast is a snapshot. It's put together with the best information we have. You've heard many of my assumptions in putting it together. And as it might appear that there were a lot of line items that we got into the weeds on, trust me that behind each one of the lines in that forecast, there are many, many more revenue and expenditure lines that we look at in coming up with our estimates for you today. So with that, this is the end of my presentation. I'm open to any questions. I'll remind you that this will then go to the board the first meeting in May for their subsequent approval in the second meeting. So that's it. Chair Cole, I'll turn it back to you. And again, if there's any questions, I'll try and address them today. If not, I'll get back to you.
Thank you so much for, as always, a very thorough thorough presentation. Mr. Treasurer, are there any questions at this point? Wonderful. Provided there are none, is there a motion to adjourn? So you guys want to stay here all night, huh?
I'll make the motion. This is Jeff.
All right. Motion and seconded.
Seconded by, was that Mr. Ragland or Mr. Green?
Mr. Green.
Yes, sir. That was, okay.
Okay.
Mr. Green.
We'll give it to Mr. Green. Thank you very much. All right. Roll call on that motion to adjourn. Mr. Green.
Yes.
Mr. Jordan.
Yes.
Board Member Ragland.
Yes.
And Board Member Cole.
Yes.
And that motion carried. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all again for joining us this evening for our FAC meeting. I look forward to seeing you at our next board meeting and of course our next FAC. If there are any questions, as always, you may feel free to reach out to Treasurer Bahork or myself. You can forward questions to me. They can be forwarded to Treasurer Bahork, or you can reach him directly. My email is mcole@columbus.k12.oh.us. Until next time, everybody, please stay healthy, wealthier, and wiser. Take care, everyone. Thank you so
all.
much.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.